Why hello folks, it's that time again. Another year, another roster review. So we're gonna go over the criterion very quickly here. I rank the Warframes by 6 criteria. First, the practicalities of offensive power, survivability, and support. And also by the intangibles, which is how easy they are to obtain, how beginner friendly they are, and how fun they are to play, which is somewhat of a subjective rating. I'll also be ranking the Warframes in release order, starting from the oldest one and ending with the ones that were released this year. That being said, if you're a new player who came to this video asking yourself if there is potentially some Warframe that you should be buying with Platinum instead of farming for it yourself, I'm going to throw out this quickly here that the only Warframes that I can in good conscience recommend that you actually buy with Platinum instead of farming would be the ones that I'd rank at a 1 when it comes to how easy they are to obtain. In particular, when it comes to this list, there is one Warframe called Styanax. It's one of the latest Warframes released. It is number 50 out of the 51 Warframes we have. They did an event a while ago where everyone who logged in got Styanax for free, but if you're a new player and you weren't part of that, he is one of the last Warframes that you can conceivably farm for. He is way later in the game. He is locked behind some endgame stuff, and he is extremely beginner friendly. So if you are a new player starting out and there is a single Warframe where I would recommend that you buy it with Platinum, it would be this guy. That being said, Warframe is a game where it is not at all mandatory to do that. Everything is farmable. You can get everything by yourself just by playing the game. And hey, that's how I recommend playing the game because it's more fun that way. Now with all of that out of the way, it is time to start the review. First up, we have the poster boy for Warframe, Excalibur. Now, what's important here is that very recently they did a revamp of the 3 starter Warframes, Excalibur, Mag, and Volt, touched them up, buffed them, and made them a little bit better. Excalibur, in particular, got a huge glow up from this. They made it so that his number 1 ability, his slash dash, now chains between enemies, and you're invulnerable while you cast it. You can bounce this around to a bunch of different enemies. It gave him a lot of survivability, it gave him a lot of utility and just increased his damage output, made him more fun to play as well. A very small change that did a lot to make this a much more enjoyable Warframe. To that extent, I'm giving Excalibur a way higher rating this year than I did last year, and it's at the point where I'm pretty much, I can comfortably recommend people picking him as their starter, which I didn't used to do. So, good on ya, Excalibur. Good on ya. Next up, we have Volt. He has always been my favorite starter. I still think he is the best starter and the one I recommend people to actually pick. And he has a lot of stuff that translates into the end game as well. So he's going to stick around in your roster and he's going to be a valuable part of your roster for a long time. In the touch-ups that he received, they primarily gave him some small support-related buffs because he was already pretty strong and didn't really need all of that much touching up. So his speed boost is a little bit better. He can now drop multiple shields that allies can pick up, and he can use his primary weapon while he uses his shield as well. The changes to Volt were so small that I haven't changed my rating about him all that much. I gave him 1 point higher in support. Other than that, he's pretty much at the same spot he was in last year, which is a very good spot. Volt is interesting because you can build him in a lot of different ways, and these different builds primarily use one of his abilities. If you want to do speed farming, you're going to build around his number 2 ability. If you want to hunt Eidolons, you build around his number 3 ability. If you want to do focus farming in Sanctuary Onslaught, you build around his number 4 ability. But you don't really have any sort of setting where you use all of his kit at the same time, so you can specialize him to do a lot of different things. He's a useful tool to have in your arsenal. Safe pick as a starter, very good Warframe. As I've talked about in previous year's roster reviews, Mag has always been, in terms of sheer power, the strongest out of the 3 starters. She can do some pretty nutty stuff with her abilities. In her touch-up, they basically just made her number 4 ability a little bit better, and they made her number 2 and number 3 abilities synergize a bit better with each other. Another bigger update was they changed a bit about how armor stripping and armor reduction works, which also benefits her and her number 4 ability. She just in general is a bit better now than she was before, and she was already a powerhouse before. However, she is not particularly beginner friendly. She requires a lot of build around, she requires a functioning energy economy. So most new players who pick Mag are gonna feel a bit disappointed by her, because it's not until you get to the really sort of end game gear where she starts to shine and really becomes good. So if you want something that's easy to pilot for a new player, then you're probably better off picking one of the other 2 starters. But if you want something that can break stuff and just do some nonsense in the end game, then Mag is your gal. Loki used to be one of the starters in the game, but he is not anymore. He is a invisibility frame. He does stealth stuff. Now the problem is, he is kind of outdated in today's Warframe, and he doesn't have basically anything going for him damage-wise. He has some pretty good, you know, support stuff he can do. He can permanently disarm enemies. He can do a switch teleport, which is kind of nice in certain bounties, but that's pretty much the only thing you're going to use it for. And he has his invisibility, which he uses for primarily spy missions. It's also a good survivability tool, obviously, because if you can just stay invisible the entire mission, then enemies can't see you, they can't shoot at you, and you won't die. He also can plop out a decoy that enemies shoot. It's kind of pointless, it doesn't do much. Now the problem here is that none of his abilities really do any damage to speak of. So he is limited to simply using his weapons for damage, and he's gonna fall behind. Everyone else in the squad is going to be constantly out-damaging him. He probably needs some help from the developers and getting a bit more of an updated kit. So he is on the weaker side. But then we have Rhino. Rhino is a godsend to new players. He is one of the first Warframes that you can farm for. You farm for him from the boss node on Venus, which is very early on in the game, and he is a super tank. He has his number 2 ability called Iron Skin. So long as this ability is active, you pretty much can't die, and you're also immune to status effects. You get a second health bar, basically, made of armor, as you can see in the top right corner there, that the enemies have to shoot through before they can actually hurt you. And as soon as this runs out, you can just recast the ability. So if you have energy, you are functionally immortal. He also has an ability he can cast to just increase all of his weapon damage. And it's gonna help allies as well and boost allies damage. Not just weapons, but, you know, he doesn't really have any damaging abilities. Well, kinda, but not really. Then you have his charge, which you can build around to get stupid armor in the end game, making him even tankier. And you have his stomp, which is a pretty decent crowd control tool. So he has a lot of stuff going for him. Is he, like, top ranked for anything in the end game? Not really, outside of just his super tankiness and his ability to stay alive in situations where a lot of other Warframes simply can't stay alive. But once you get to the end game, you start to gravitate more towards the Warframes that can have some sort of stupid damage output, which Rhino can't really do to the same extent that other people can. But for a new player, he's fantastic. I always recommend new players to start farming for Rhino as fast as you can. If you have any sort of trouble clearing the star chart and enemies are getting too dangerous and you just keep dying all the time, switch to Rhino, game gets easy. Ashe is the ninja Warframe, and he absolutely lives up to his name. He can go invisible, he can do the Kage Bunshin thing of creating a bunch of shadow clones that can target enemies for massive damage. He can throw ninja stars that strip enemies from their armor, you know, all of the ninja stuff. And he works fantastically for just very focused damage. He can out-damage a lot of other Warframes, and he can rip through basically everything. Now, That's what he has. In terms of survivability, you survive by being invisible. That's it. Just use your smoke screen and be invisible. It doesn't have a long duration at its base though, so you kinda have to mod around it to be able to stay invisible for longer periods of time. And all of his abilities basically focus on dealing damage and assassinating. As far as being a support for the rest of the team, he doesn't really, help anyone else out. He's just pretty good at killing things, and killing things very quickly. Now, one thing about Ashe is that last year I gave him a 1 in how easy he was to obtain, because they put his parts at the end of like 20 minutes of defense in the late game railjack missions. It was insane. Now, they have also started adding his stuff to the drop tables in Exterminate and Volatile missions in Railjack, so they have addressed that to an extent. He is a bit easier to farm for now. You can also get him in the A rotation of the defense missions, which means that you can get him after just playing the mission for 5 minutes instead of 20. So he's still pretty hard to farm for, just not as excruciatingly hard to farm for as he was last year. Now, I have talked a lot about Ember in previous videos, about how I just love Ember, and I do. I love Ember. I think she's fantastic. I think she's underrated. She is still very good. She used to be able to do something a couple of years ago with an ability called World on Fire. That was a bit too good, so they reworked her and took that ability away. And since then, she's got this stigma where people think that Ember's not good anymore, but no, she absolutely is. She's actually really good. Her number 2 ability can give her up to 90% damage reduction. Her number 3 ability can remove enemies' defenses, strip them of all of their armor. Her number 4 ability calls down meteors from the sky, and with the augment, those meteors create energy orbs as well when enemies die, so that she can just constantly keep herself topped up with energy, so that she can spam her abilities. And this is a pretty nice little rotation of just having her immolation aura and being very, very tanky, having a great damage reduction, using the Fire Blast constantly to just vent so that you don't drain energy too fast and strip the defense of everything around you, and then just crash down meteors from the sky, kill all the enemies, generate more energy so that you can keep it up. You can walk through an entire mission like this. You don't even have to use your weapons. You can burn everything to a crisp just with your abilities and be extremely tanky while you're doing it. Very simple to understand, a very cohesive kit, it's fun to use, and it's good. I rank Ember up there, way higher than most people rank her. I still think she's one of the better Warframes in the game. And you can farm for her decently easy, just by doing the boss node on Saturn. Ember is a huge recommend from me, always has been, always will be. Trinity is a bit of a special case, because she was designed to be a healing and support Warframe, and that is exactly what she is. She does healing, she does support, and she is very, very good at it. She was good at it 5 years ago, and she's still good at it today. The problem is that the game has somewhat passed her by, and there isn't really the same need anymore for a pure support Warframe the way there was before. Most Warframes, they can handle their own survivability, their own energy, their own shields and armor and health, and debuffing enemies, all of that. So she doesn't really serve a purpose in the Warframe of today. As far as damage goes, she does have her Energy Vampire, which is fantastic for single target damage, where she can deal true damage, which bypasses all defenses on a single enemy, and just wipe it out. That's not too bad, but she doesn't have the big room clearing things that a lot of other Warframes do, so she does provide support. Where support would be good would potentially be early on for new players, but you farm for her when you get to Pluto, which is pretty far in the star chart. And not only that, she kind of requires you to have some build around and a functioning energy economy. So she doesn't really work as a support Warframe for brand new players who don't have any gear either. So she's kind of in a weird spot right now where there's not really any huge point in playing her. She's not bad by any means, she just doesn't really fit in the game of today. So she might be one of those Warframes that the developers might have to, you know, take a peek at, see if they need to rework her somehow and make her relevant again. Not bad, just not currently all that relevant. Now, Frost is an interesting one, because Frost used to be a bit of a punching bag, and he was one of the Warframes that people called for a rework for, saying that, like, he needed something more, and he's sort of outdated and stuff. He got indirectly buffed because they changed how armor stripping abilities work. Now armor stripping is always permanent, and it goes from a percentage of total armor instead of remaining armor, blah de blah de blah. What that means is that his number 4 ability is way, way better than it used to be. It has a stronger base armor reduction. If you increase the casting speed on this thing, so he casts it a bit faster, then now this is actually a pretty good tool for removing enemy defenses. Then he still has his old stuff, so he can build his snow globes, make snow globes around defense targets. Since he is very early to farm for, you farm for him just an easy boss node on Ceres, you can get him pretty quickly. And he is, for a lot of people, the first sort of defensive Warframe, like the first pure defense Warframe that you get your hands on. Which is great, because none of the starter Warframes, Excalibur, Mag, Volt, they're not super good at just defending stationary targets. It's kind of the one thing that's missing from the starters. And Frost provides that. He provides help for doing defense missions, excavation missions, mobile defense missions, slam down snow globes, and you can just keep the defense target alive. The problem is that you can't shoot through the snow globes from the outside, so it can be a bit annoying for your teammates if you just plop down snow globes everywhere. That's why you use your number 1 ability, not to damage enemies, you use it to pop your own snow globe, because the ability can do that. Just a tip for all you fledgling Frost players out there: pop your own snow globes so that they're not in the way of other players. But now that he has his very, very much buffed up number 4 ability, Frost is in a better spot than he was last year. He gets a higher rating than he got last year, and he's you know what, he's not even bad. They even gave him a new augment mod that gave him like way higher crit chance and crit damage against frozen targets, and he's pretty good at freezing stuff with his abilities. So the damage numbers are starting to look a lot better for Frost. So yeah, go Frost, look at him go. He's in a better spot now. Now, Nyx is a Warframe that I really like. I actually play her a fair bit, but I do feel that I rated her a bit too high last year, so I've lowered the rating somewhat to this year, particularly when it comes to like offensive power. That being said, the thing about Nyx is that she is not made for low-level content, which might sound weird. She's made for high-level content. She's made for fighting against enemies that are super tough and super strong. In low-level content, you kind of just want to be able to kill stuff fast, and you want to be able to be very, like, sort of efficient. And Nyx is not. Nyx is not efficient and fast. No, she's slow and methodical. But when you get to the really high-level enemies that actually, you know, your weapons just start not doing a whole lot anymore, that's when you need someone like her. She has an ability that is point and click, remove all of the defenses from anything you aim it at. Fantastic for going through steel path, stuff like that. Fighting against high-level Grineer enemies that have just too much armor. Point and click, now they don't have armor anymore. She has her number 4 ability that makes her immortal, but stationary. If you get the augment for this, you can move around and shoot your weapons while you are immortal. You just move very slowly. You can get around that by switching into operator form and void dashing. You can use certain melee stances that actually carry you forward when you do combos. There are some ways of moving faster even when you're in the absorb bubble. But you don't have to. You can take things slow. You can just be immortal so long as you have energy. Enemies shoot you and nothing happens. You can point and click, remove their defenses, and just gun them down with your weapons. So if you are struggling with Steel Path and you just sort of like want an in and just understand how to start making progress, my recommendation is to pick Nyx. She is useless in low-level content. She shines in high-level content. So not a beginner-friendly Warframe, but definitely has her use in higher level content. And she's just got so much crowd control. Her first ability is crowd control, second ability crowd control, third ability crowd control, fourth ability crowd control. So you can basically just disrupt whatever your enemies are doing. Kind of nice to have a Nyx on the team, to be honest. When it comes to weapon damage, Banshee might be the strongest Warframe in the entire game. She has an ability called Sonar. You cast it and you put a weak point on enemies. You shoot them in the weak point and they take, look at this, without any modding at all and just a completely unmodded Warframe, 5 times more damage. And you can get that number up way higher. You can get that up to 8 times. You can get that up to 10 times. That just makes whatever P shooter you're holding a goddamn tactical nuke. It also works against Sisters of Parvos and Kuvaliches and their weird damage reduction that makes it so that you have to like shoot at them for like half an hour and just tickle their health bar. No, use Sonar, put a weak point on that lich, shoot them in the weak point, they go down immediately. It is ludicrous. She also has one of the better subsume abilities for the helmet system in Silence. Just cover a huge area where enemies, they take a stun when you get close to them, and they're also banned from using any of their abilities. They can't. They can only just shoot their weapons. They can't use any special abilities while they're within range of your silence. This is excellent for fighting against things like Necromex, because they can't activate their immortality. There are just a lot of uses for it. Now, she is a bit squishy. She is not on the tanky side, so you need, you know, a bit of help to keep her alive. And you need to have a very active and very mobile playstyle. But if you do, the damage numbers are ludicrous. She's also very easy to get your hands on. She's one of the dojo Warframes, so all you have to do is just go to your dojo and buy the blueprints for her and then craft her. That's it. So, great Warframe, really fun, really strong, just a bit squishy. A glass cannon, if you will. But goddamn can she do numbers with her damage. Next up we have Saryn. Saryn is a lot of people's favorite Warframe. She's one of the most played Warframes in the game. She's one of the strongest Warframes in the game consistently, year after year. Nothing has changed. She is still one of the strongest Warframes in the game. It all comes down to her number 1 ability, Spores. You shoot a spore at an enemy, and then you kill them and pop that spore, and it spreads. It spreads to all the enemies that are around that enemy. And then when they die, it spreads to all the enemies that are around them. And that spore never goes away. That spore is a dot, a damage over time effect, and it just sticks onto that enemy until they die. And it just keeps on spreading to more and more enemies across the entire map. It is super easy to just wipe entire rooms with Saryn. If you have your number 3 ability active, then you don't even have to kill an enemy that you have infected with a spore, you just have to attack them. Hit them with your melee weapon, shoot them with your gun, it doesn't matter. So long as this ability is active, you just put a spore on an enemy and then attack them, and suddenly every single enemy on the entire map is infected with spores, and those spores are just going to kill the enemies. They're just going to be there, tick down their health until they die, and keep spreading. You can cast her number 4 ability to deal viral damage to enemies, deals more damage to enemies who are affected by spores, just helps the spores spread even faster. And she's got Molt, who just lets her, you know, survive a bit more and get out of sticky situations. Now, I have dropped her rating a little bit because I lowered her fun to play, because, you know, it is, after a while, not very skill testing to play Saryn. You just make sure that everything is always infected with spores and everything dies. You're gonna be the prime damage dealer in the team. You kill enemies that are several rooms away. You don't even see them before they die. And then you can always, you know, just ask yourself, is that really fun? Because you don't really get to engage with enemies because you're just so good at killing everything. But But some people are into that. Some people are into just being the best damage dealer on the team. And if you want to be that, then Saryn has been your gal for several years, and Saryn is still your gal. Vauban, you get him a bit differently from how you get other Warframes. You get him from the Nightwave store. So you play Nightwave, you do your weekly Nightwave challenges, and you get your Nightwave creds. And then you buy his component parts from the Nightwave store, which is super easy. So he is one of the first Warframes a new player can get their hands on. Now, like Frost, Vauban is a defensive support Warframe primarily. He doesn't really have any super good directly damaging abilities. He has his Photon Strike, where he can call down artillery from the sky, but as far as damage goes, it's not great. But when he shines is all of his crowd control and all of his support. He can dump down a bunch of different mines where there are, you know, there are some pretty good ones. The flechette orbs that fire damage in every direction, they're not bad. And he has his Bastille, which he can just, you know, suck enemies into a vortex. They're just locked in place. They can't do anything. And you can strip them of all of their armor. And that's going to be permanent nowadays with the, you know, with the armor stripping changes. So permanently remove all of the enemy's armor, and suddenly those little flechette orbs, they start dealing some more damage than they did before, you know? His survivability comes mainly from crowd control and just shutting down enemies and negating entire rooms where nothing can move, nothing can do anything, everything is locked in place. And, you know, strips enemies of their defenses, provides some nice buffs and debuffs all around. And then you just go around and just pop everything off with your guns. So if that sounds like a fun time to you, then by all means, take Vauban out for a spin and test something that's a little different from your starter Warframe experience. So, Nova got one of the biggest glow-ups since last year. They've made some changes. They've buffed some augment mods. In particular for Nova, her Null Star, which is her defensive ability. She just creates these orbs orbiting around her that give her damage reduction. But there is an augment called Neutron Star that makes these orbs fire out and hit enemies for like a hefty amount of fire damage. And like that's been buffed to the point now where it's actually become a very, very potent damage-dealing ability. And since Nullstar is Nova's Helminth ability that she can give to other Warframes, that has now become accessible to a lot of people. If you want to give your Warframe some more damage-dealing capacity, it used to be like Gauss's Thermal Sunder if you wanted like a quick room-clearing ability. But now Nullstar with Neutron Star is like a super viable alternative to that. She also previously had her Antimatter Drop, which is also a good damaging ability, albeit somewhat clunky to use. And she has her Molecular Prime, which is her bread and butter. She can slow down an entire field of enemies, or if you build her for negative strength, she can actually speed up enemies, which is good if you want to like go through defense missions quickly and you want every wave to be over fast. Then you want enemies running even faster toward the defense objective. But most people use it as a slowing ability, slow enemies to a crawl, in which case they can't hurt you, and then they explode when they die. Nova has gotten such a touch up from these buffs that I currently have her as the second highest ranked Warframe in the entire game, all things considered. So don't sleep on Nova. She is really good right now, really good. Her play rate is going up, her numbers are going up. More and more people every day have started realizing that, oh, wow, Nova is actually really, really good right now. So take her for a spin. Now, Nekros is a Warframe that I have done dirty in previous years' roster reviews. And I have actually been ranking him lower than I should be. He is better than I have been giving him credit for. I put him up there like for beginner friendliness for his Desecrate ability. He is known as the Loot Frame. If you have this ability active, then enemies simply drop more loot. And since this is a grinder's game, you always need to build new stuff, you always need to farm for new stuff. Just getting more loot from everything is fantastic, it's something new players need. You can farm him pretty early by just going to the boss node on Deimos, fighting as Lephantis, and you can farm him that way. It used to be that you had to do that solo because that node didn't have public matchmaking, but it does now, so you're always in a full squad. It's not particularly hard, you can get Nekros pretty easily. How I wasn't really fair to him before was that I didn't account for the fact that he can become super tanky. His number 4 ability, Shadows of the Dead, there's an augment that makes them share damage with you, so that, you know, the damage you take gets transferred over to your Shadows of the Dead instead. And that actually makes him really tanky. You can super build around that. I used to think that you had to choose between either Desecrate or Shadows of the Dead, but I was again wrong. You can absolutely build around both at the same time. And with the changes to how armor stripping works, and the fact that they increased the base armor reduction from Terrify, his number 2 ability is now also good as a way of stripping enemy defenses. So he can just do a lot more than I used to give him credit for being able to do. He's good. He's really good. And he's cool, right? He's the Necromancer Warframe. He's got the super fantastic Grim Reaper aesthetic. So it's also very different, you know, because he summons the dead and stuff like that. That's cool. So yeah, Nekros. He's good. I didn't see it before, but you know, I've seen the light. Valkyr is unfortunately outdated. She is very high up on my list of Warframes that are in need of a rework, and she is one of the lowest ranked Warframes on this entire list. Like, I know there are people who swear by Valkyr and who really like playing her, but she's just... her rip line, that it's just parkour, right? It had a use back before we had bullet jumping, but now we have bullet jumping, so it's kind of useless. Paralysis might be one of the top 5 worst abilities in the entire game. You can stun and damage enemies around you, but you have to drain your own shields to do it, so you kind of hurt yourself for doing it, and the damage still isn't anything to write home about. Warcry is her best ability, but all that does is just increases armor, increases speed, decreases enemy speed, and it's just attack speed, right? And it's also her helmet ability, so anyone can have access to it. And then you have her number 4, her exalted weapons, her claws. And you activate them, and yeah, you do a bunch of damage, but if you deactivate them at the wrong time, then it backfires and you die. But so long as they are active, you are immortal. So she has that. She has an immortality button. So you can activate this ability and you simply can't die. Now, problem is, you know, she's a melee Warframe, and with how melee mods work nowadays, you can build normal melee weapons to be stronger than her exalted weapon. So it's just the immortality, right? And there are other Warframes that can also go immortal, except that they're not as limited as Valkyr is in just being a melee Warframe. So I just can't recommend her really to anyone. She's outdated. She needs a rework. I said last year that she needs a rework. I'm saying it again this year. Valkyr needs a rework. Oberon is cool. Oberon is really cool. He used to be a Warframe that you could get super early because you farmed him from Eximus enemies. Then they changed that and they put him at late game Railjack, which made him like almost impossible for a new player to farm for. Which kind of sucks because a new player is primarily who would want to play Oberon. Now they've fixed that somewhat, they patched that up, they moved his acquisition from the Veil, which is the last and most high level part of Railjack, and instead moved it to Earth, which is the lowest level Railjack stuff. And even if you don't have your own Railjack or you're just starting out with a brand new Railjack, the Earth nodes are not particularly hard, so for a new player you can actually, you know, conceivably farm for Oberon again. So that's been addressed, which is nice. Now, what makes Oberon a bit cool is that he, you know, his survivability is built around healing. And he's really good at healing, both himself and allies around him. You can combine this stuff with, you know, Hunter Adrenaline to make sure that you basically can't run out of energy and you're always healing yourself, which actually makes him very, very tanky, very hard to kill. So it requires some build around. Not too much build around, but a little bit of build around. But then you got your hands on a really cool tank. He can also put grass on the ground, and when enemies step on the grass, they take more damage. And like I've said with some previous Warframes, when they changed how armor stripping works, his number 4 ability suddenly became a lot better as a tool for removing enemy defenses. It still probably requires 2 casts, because it's hard to give him enough ability strength to completely strip enemies with 1 cast, and it's still slow, and it still costs a lot. So you need to increase your casting speed, you need to increase your ability efficiency, but if you do, it is in fact better at stripping enemy armor than it was before. So Oberon is in a little bit of a better spot this year than he was last year, reflected by a slightly higher grade. So if you go to this channel and you check out the playlist for Warframe guides, you'll find that I made a video before talking about the 5 most underrated Warframes in the entire game, and guess what? Zephyr is on it. Zephyr is very high up on that list. Is Zephyr number 1 on the list? I don't know, maybe you have to watch the video to find out. But she is ludicrous. She might be the strongest Warframe in the game that almost no one plays. She used to be pretty bad, and then she got a huge rework, and now she's really good, and I guess people still haven't got the message. Maybe it's a playstyle thing, maybe it's just that you're supposed to always be up in the air and fly around, and maybe some people don't like that, but if you do just be in the air and fly around, you can hold caster number 1 ability to just be stuck in the air, so you can fly forever. Her number 3 ability, Turbulence, look at that. Redirects all incoming projectiles. Projectiles can't hurt you while this ability is active. Only melee attacks and explosions, like boom boom AoE explosions. But, you know, primarily melee attacks. But hey, if you're always flying, enemies can't reach you with your melee attacks. So if you're just in the air and have this ability active, you're functionally immortal. You can't die. You just can't die. Then you cast her number 4 ability, which is a bunch of tornadoes. Enemies get sucked into the tornadoes. You shoot, not the enemies, but you shoot at the tornadoes, and that's gonna hurt every enemy that's stuck inside the tornado. It's gonna get amplified. You can have damage types bouncing in between enemies. You can do some nutty things damage-wise. So she's functionally immortal, she's an insane damage dealer, she's got excellent crowd control abilities, she's got excellent grouping abilities, she can basically do everything, and no one plays her. It's so weird. Why aren't you playing Zephyr? She's fantastic. In last year's video, I talked about how Hydroid might be the Warframe that is most in need of a rework. He's up there, he's in the top 3 of Warframes that need a rework. So what has happened since last year? Well, nothing. Nothing has happened since last year. Hydroid is still in just as bad of a spot as he was before. He is still in desperate need of a rework. Now, he has his tentacle swarm with an augment that makes enemies who are stuck in his tentacle drop more loot. So he is a loot frame. That is why new players might want him. You can use this together with Nekros Desecrate to get even more loot, but that's about it. He has really strong damage dealing abilities, but they require him to be stuck inside a puddle of water where you can't move, can't interact with anything. It is the most boring time you can imagine. Just like last year, this is the only Warframe on the entire list that gets the 1-star rating in fun to play. He is miserably boring to play. If you play Hydroid, you're gonna start hating Warframe and you're gonna think this is a goddamn boring game. That's how boring he is. He just ruins everything he touches. He needs a complete overhaul. They need to change everything about how he works, because currently I would never recommend anyone to play Hydroid. I wouldn't recommend Hydroid to my worst enemy. Not because he can't do stuff, because he can. He's like immortal. He has infinitely scaling damage. He's a loot frame. But he is just such a miserable experience to play. Don't subject yourself to it. Pick a fun loot frame instead, like Khora or Nekros, and just leave Hydroid on the shelf collecting dust until they rework him. So Mirage is super cool. I really like her. She is a insanely strong damage dealer, but like some other Warframes, her damage comes from her weapons, her guns. So she has her number 1 ability that she can spawn a bunch of doppelgangers, and they're fake mirages, but guess what? Their guns are still real, so you do so much more gun damage because they also shoot. And you can stack this up and buff this to do really, really big damage numbers. She has her Eclipse that increases her weapon damage while she's standing in light and gives her damage reduction while she's standing in shadows. It's clunky and it's hard to get it to work right, but when it does work right, it just ramps up her damage to even bigger, stupider numbers. That's what she can do with weapon damage, and this goes for high level content as well. Then she has her sleight of hand, where she can, you know, drop booby traps on the ground and they explode and enemies take damage. If you have the augment mod for it, explosive legerdemain, which is fantastic for focus farming in Sanctuary Onslaught. You can wipe out entire maps. That is primarily what people use Mirage for. If you're doing Sanctuary Onslaught and you just see all of the enemies around you on the map just dying constantly and you can't tell what they're dying from, then you probably have a Mirage on your team who's using this ability. She also has her Prism, which is her worst ability, but, you know, it's fun to throw a disco ball that explodes, I guess. So if you like Warframes that are focused around weapon damage and buffing your weapon damage and just making your weapons stronger, then Mirage is absolutely a Warframe you should go for. Bit of a glass cannon, not very tanky, but glass cannons can also be fun. Limbo is the most unique Warframe in the entire game. He has a passive that lets him jump in and out of reality whenever he does a dash. He goes into his own little pocket dimension, his own little upside down, where he can't interact with anything and nothing can interact with him as well. So long as he stays inside of the rift, he is just immortal. But he can't really do anything either. So like, when it comes to survivability, he is... yeah, nothing can survive like him because he can just hide in the upside down forever. But then you have some stuff you can do. You can use him in defense missions because you can create a localized rift and it damages enemies. And if you have your number 2 ability active, it also stuns and freezes enemies inside of it. So that makes him a great tool for using in defense missions if you want to defend objectives. It can just be a bit annoying to have a Limbo on the team, because whenever you dash in and out of the rift, you leave behind a little rift portal, and your allies can actually run through that, and now they can be stuck in the rift with you. Not everyone knows that you can roll to get out of the rift, and it can be a problem, because you can use your banish ability to banish enemies into the rift, and then nothing can hurt them. Your teammates can't hurt them, so... Limbo is one of those Warframes that can absolutely troll other players and just grief them and make it harder for other people to be able to play the game. And if you don't know how to play Limbo, you can actually do that accidentally. So there's a lot of people who kind of groan when they see a Limbo on the team because they worry that it's a Limbo who doesn't know how to Limbo. And if you're a Limbo who doesn't know how to Limbo, then you might just accidentally ruin the experience for everyone else. But he is super fun, he's so unique, he plays differently from everyone else, he always breaks the game. Whenever they put out a new update to the game, Limbo always breaks it, and then they have to patch the game because there was something fucky that Limbo could do that they hadn't accounted for. So he's so unique, I'm always gonna put him up there in just creativity and fun. but he is definitely not for everyone. He also doesn't really have any good damage dealing ability, so he's all support and all wacky stuff, but not a whole lot of direct damage. Still fun though, he's so fun, he's so much fun. Mesa, I had to drop her rating a bit from last year, and it's not really that anything changed with Mesa. It's not like she's been nerfed or anything. In fact, her number 1 ability, her ballistic battery, has been buffed. It's still useless. It's still a bad ability, but it got buffed. No, her shatter shield got buffed as well. It's just that as, you know, the damage numbers in this game get higher and higher, as power creep becomes more and more of a thing every year, some Warframes can go nutty and some Warframes can't. Nowadays, when it's pretty accessible for a lot of Warframes to be able to go up to the level cap and fight against level 9,999 enemies, then you start looking at, okay, which Warframes actually should get 5-star ratings in damage, and it's the Warframes that have damage numbers that are infinitely scaling, and Mesa's aren't. Her Peacemakers are her big damage dealing ability, and those guns do a whole lot of damage. They can rip through everything on the star chart, they can rip through most things on the steel path as well, but when it comes up to the really, really high level stuff, then there is a limit. There is a limit to how strong the Peacemakers can become, and they can't become any stronger than that. So I'm gonna take her down to a 4 in damage. She's still great. She's still great for 99% of the content of the game. She just can't do level cap stuff like some other Warframes can. So it's not really a knock on her. It's more a commentary on the game and what direction the game has been moving in for these past couple of years. So it kind of shows that she can't really keep up anymore with some of the other Warframes. Now, Chroma is a really interesting one on this list because his numbers are deceptively high for a Warframe that currently doesn't really see a whole lot of play and that currently isn't particularly relevant. He's gone through so many reworks, they've tried so many things to make Chroma really good, he's just not there yet. His Spectral Scream is an absolute garbage ability, and it doesn't matter what they do with it, it seems to still be garbage. His Elemental Ward is okay, but it's mostly the cold version for more armor, and the other versions don't really see a lot of play. Vex Armor is great for increasing your armor and increasing your weapon damage, and it increases your weapon damage by a lot, which makes him a really, really strong damage dealer when it comes to weapon damage. Problem is you have to take damage yourself to get this buff. And then you have his effigy, which is kind of just useless for everything except occasionally getting extra credits when you kill Prophet Taker. That's the only thing people ever use this ability for. Now the thing about Chroma is that, you know, as of recording this video, they've been talking about bringing self-damage back in the game. So his rating is gonna be a little bit reliant on whether or not that happens. Chroma was better back when self-damage was in the game, because then you could intentionally hurt yourself to get the Vex armor buffs and get his damage numbers up. If they bring self-damage back, then actually Chroma could become relevant again, which would be interesting. He currently isn't really relevant, but so we'll see. As of recording this video, there's not really a whole lot of reason for anyone to play Chroma, but if self-damage comes back, that might actually change, and Chroma might actually be a lot better than he is today. Now, I'm a little bit biased here because I'm an Equinox main. There are dozens of us. Dozens. But I love Equinox. I think she is fantastic. She has the ability to switch between 2 different forms, night form and day form. Each form has its own ability kit. So it's basically 7 different abilities in one Warframe. One is focused on healing and sleeping enemies and crowd control. The other is focused on direct damage. And the issues with Equinox, and I've made a video talking about this, is that you get kind of punished for switching between forms in combat, so you're supposed to pick one, and then you build around that form. So you either play Night Form Equinox, or you play Day Form Equinox, but it's very hard to make both work at the same time, if not impossible. Which is why I think Equinox kind of needs a bit of a rework. She needs to be in a position where you should be switching forms mid-mission. I don't like that you sort of get punished for doing that. That being said, she is so versatile. She can do basically anything and everything in this game. She's tricky to understand and really, you know, get a good handle on how to use all 7 of her abilities. But if you can do it, you get absolutely rewarded for it. Great for focus farming, great for damage, great for buffing and debuffing, great for spy missions. You can detonate spy cameras while you're outside of the vault, and then you should go in and there are no spy cameras. Like, the applications are endless. You can do everything with Equinox, and she's super versatile, super fun, just kind of tricky to farm for, tricky to understand. Might need some tweaks and reworks to make her a bit more cohesive, but still very, very good. Why isn't anyone playing Equinox? I don't understand. She's fantastic. Atlas is really cool, but he is a Warframe that is somewhat hard to recommend because anything you do with him requires so much build around. If you don't have that build around, you're just gonna try to make him work and you can't really understand how it all's supposed to like synergize and click. But it does. First of all, he's got like great crowd control tools. He can slam up walls for defending objectives. He can summon these rumblers who just stone golems, walk around and bash enemies and draw fire. He can petrify enemies, turn them into stone. So like pretty good crowd control tools all around. Then he has a mechanic where you need to pick up rubble. If you petrify enemies and then you hit them with your big landslide punch, which is his bread and butter, you're supposed to go around playing One Punch Man with this guy, then they drop rubble, and when you pick up the rubble you get extra armor, and then you have augment mods that make you do some kind of crazy stuff when you have a lot of rubble. And if you get it all to sort of work together, then you're just gonna walk around, turn enemies into stone, punching the enemies with your stone punch, keep that going forever. The damage numbers get really insane. It just requires so much build around. He's also one of those Warframes that needs a so-called stat stick, which is a melee weapon which is built in a specific way, because this landslide punch is actually, you know, the damage is boosted by how you have modded your melee weapon. So it's a bit tricky, it's hard to explain. You basically have to read an essay to understand how you're correctly supposed to play Atlas. But if you do all of that, I mean, look at him. Look how cool he is. And according to his lore, he once punched a meteor into dust. And that's pretty cool. So all things considered, like he's, you know, he's fun. He's fun. He's a bit different. But if this seems like something you want to build around and you want to invest in it, then he's pretty special. So he's not bad at all. Wukong used to be the most played Warframe in the game, like even more than Excalibur, but he just got hit with a nerf hammer. He's still one of the better Warframes in the game. He's still up in like my top 10 rankings, because he is. But they definitely hit him with a precision strike with some nerfs, because he was played so much more than everything else. So he was overtuned. So what did they do? They hit his Celestial Twin, because they thought his Celestial Twin was a bit too good and it can just complete an entire mission for you. Just summon your twin, the twin does everything for you, and it's AFK frame. Now, your twin and you share ammo. Your twin no longer has his own ammo pool with infinite ammo, so now your twin can run out of ammo. Now your twin does less damage than it did before. Now your twin is no longer immune to self-stagger. So your twin is simply not as good as it used to be. So now if you play Wukong, you are actually forced to play the mission yourself. You're forced to actually click on the fire button and shoot your own guns. You can't just rely on your twin to do everything anymore. Which is probably good, because that twin was a bit too strong. On the contrary though, you know, they made his exalted weapon a little bit better. And they made the Cloudwalker thing, you know, a little bit better for you know, affecting allies as well. So he can still do a whole lot. He's still super tanky, he can get himself extra armor and invulnerability with Defy. He can use his Cloudwalker to go invisible and zoom through spy vaults. He just... You can no longer play the entire game AFK and just let your twin do everything for you. Still good, but definitely not as good as he was a year ago. And we'll probably see the play rates affect that. And I think people are gonna be moving a bit away from Wukong and try other things. Which is probably also a good thing, because we were getting to a point where Warframe was starting to feel like Wukong frame. And I don't think that's gonna be the case for 2023. Ivara is a spy frame. Ivara is probably my favorite spy frame. She can't run while she's invisible like the other spy frames can, but on the other hand, it just stays active forever. It's not duration based like other invisibility stuff that other warframes have. So if you just be patient and walk around and have energy, you can be invisible for the entire mission. Then she can do a couple of nutty damage stuff. If you use the dash wire and stand on the right thing and, you know, front load it by hitting enemies with one of these arrows, and then you use your navigator for a damage multiplier, and you got your art, like, you can do really high damage numbers to your targets, but it requires a lot of build around. Most people use her primarily for her invisibility and for stuff related to invisibility, spy missions, animal captures. She's great for that, by the way, because she can sleep enemies. You don't even need to use your tranq gun. Just use the sleep arrow, and you'll sleep enemies in one hit, no matter like how high level that animal is. And you're invisible while doing it, which is great. But the problem is then, if she's primarily used for spy missions, which is what most people primarily use Ivara for, then Ivara is used to farm for Ivara. But no. Whenever you need to do anything spy related, anything invisibility related, maybe you have to crack open a Riven mod that requires you to do finishers or complete enemy like missions while undetected, Ivara is your gal. She's just the one you're always gonna go to. So she's always gonna be useful. There's always gonna be a place in the game for her. It's just one of those warframes that you want to have in your arsenal. Just like last year, nothing has changed. Nezha is still my highest overall ranked warframe on this entire list. It's just because he is pretty good at everything. He doesn't have any holes, he doesn't have any weaknesses. His ability kit is good. He can do damage and stun enemies. He can run on the ground and leave fire, and that hurts enemies. That's cool. He has Warding Halo, which is kind of like Rhino's Iron Skin. It gives him invulnerability while you cast it. He has his Chakram. It can strip enemy defenses. It can be used as a teleport. He just has like a kit where everything is useful and everything is good. He's a decently good damage dealer. He is tanky. He has crowd control and support. He is a dojo frame, so he is super easy to get. Just go to the dojo and buy him and craft him. He is beginner friendly. He gives tankiness, which new players want, and he just has just a kit that makes sense. All of it flows together. All of it is fun. All of it feels enjoyable. Nezha is better Rhino. That's what he is. He's better Rhino, and there's just no reason to not play him. He's a joy. He's super fun, good at everything. And every single year having to follow Nezha, who's good at everything, we have Inaros, who is bad at everything. Inaros is one of those baffling warframes that some people continue to rank high year after year, despite the fact that he is ass on a stick. He is bad. He's bad. The reason why some people think that Inaros is good is because Inaros has a lot of armor and a really big health pool, and he's tanky. And there are scenarios where your Warframe abilities can't really do a whole lot, and you can't really... You're in an environment where you aren't really using your abilities anyway. Then you could use Inaros because he's a tank. But like, he's not even good at that. Nowadays, when you want to do like really difficult content, you don't use armor and health, you use shield gating, which is something Inaros can't even do because he doesn't have any shields. So as far as survivability and tankiness goes, he actually gets outclassed by practically every Warframe in the game when it comes to high level content. His method of survivability with health and armor only really works in lower level content where you kinda don't need it anyway. Then you get to his abilities where it's like his number 2 ability might be the single worst ability in all of Warframe. You can trap an enemy and then you can slowly turn that enemy to sand. It's gonna take about 10 minutes to kill a single enemy by using this ability. That's it. And yeah, you're invulnerable while you're doing it, but you're standing there for 10 minutes killing a single enemy. And then it becomes a sand golem for 30 seconds and then it dies. This is so bad. This is so bad. And you're like, yeah, but you heal yourself when you do it. Yeah, but I don't need that because he heals himself when he hits enemies with finishers. Look at this lifesteal from his number 1 ability. You blind enemies and then you go and stab them with a finisher and that heals you because it has lifesteal. So I don't even need this ability to heal because I have a better ability to heal. And then I guess he can give himself some more armor and give himself status immunity, but that's nothing impressive. There's a bunch of Warframes that can give themselves status immunity and, you know, also be tankier than him. And then he has Sandstorm, which might be, I don't know, not the worst ability in the game, but maybe top 5 worst abilities in the game. Like, all of his abilities suck. That's the truth of it. When it comes to the Helminth and what do you replace, you can replace any of his abilities with any other ability in the Helminth system, and he's going to improve. He's going to be better than he was before that. That's how bad all of his abilities are. Inaros is the lowest ranked Warframe on this entire list. He doesn't really have anything going for him except, I don't know, if you're a brand new player and you just want something that has like a big health bar, then sure, pick Inaros. Just know that there are better options. Anything Inaros can do, other Warframes can do better. Just don't play Inaros. Just DE, please rework Inaros. He's so bad. He's so bad. Titania is cool. She is the Arc-Wing Warframe. She can turn herself into her Razor Wing form, where she becomes a little pixie and she can fly around like Arc-Wing in normal missions. She gets exalted weapons, melee weapons, and pistols with infinite ammo. They're pretty strong. She has crowd control, stun enemies, whisk them into the air, that you can also cast on yourself to give yourself status immunity. She's got some nice buffs that she can give herself by casting this on enemies and then flying through them. She's got her little razor flies that, you know, become beacons and then explode. Like, it's a pretty cool kit. She's pretty good at most things. Currently, where she excels and where people really play her is partly for speed farming relic missions. Usually they infuse Gauss's thermal sunder so that she can like quickly kill entire rooms, but speed farming and like Halls of Ascension on Lua, where she trivializes every single Hall of Ascension. So that's rad. But even beyond that, like she can do most content in the game, and she can do it pretty well. So if you like the idea of just flying around as a little pixie and doing like Arc-Wing stuff in normal missions, if that sounds fun to you, then absolutely she's viable. She's viable and pretty good at most things, and you won't regret it if you spec into her and if you main her. She's in a pretty good spot in the game. There's just always going to be a niche for her. Some people are always going to gravitate toward her, and some people just don't like the Arcwing stuff, and then they won't use her, I guess. But, you know, she's in pretty much the same spot as she was last year, which is a good spot. I can recommend her. She's good. Nidus has one drawback, really, and that is that he is miserable to farm for. You have to play the infested salvage mission on Eris, and you have to run it for a while to get a chance at one of his parts. Now, one thing that you should know if you're going to be farming for Nidus is that the mission actually goes faster to complete if you play it solo. If you play it in a squad, each round takes longer. So if you are gonna go through that farm and get Nidus, set your game to solo mode and you'll get through it at a bit of a faster pace, which is probably what you want. So Nidus is unfortunately one of those Warframes that ever since his Prime came out, it's easier to get Nidus Prime than it is to get normal Nidus, which is kind of, you know, a miserable experience. But if you can get him, he is good. He used to have another drawback, which was that he kind of needs to cast his abilities on stuff and then kill them in a certain way to build his virulence stacks to make his stuff work. But there are some augments now to where you can get virulence stacks even if other people kill your stuff. So he's no longer as punished for playing in a group. He works in a group setting as well. Then, of course, he has a fantastic passive. If you have 15 stacks of mutation and then you get killed, you don't die. It's a near-death experience. It saves you from death. So, Nidus, so long as he can keep his virulence stacks up and keep a bunch of virulence stacks, he's functionally immortal. He can cast a parasitic link. It increases damage to an enemy. It redirects damage. You can cast it on an ally and you both get more ability strength. You can plop down a big thing on the map. Enemies that stand on the map, they take damage. And you get more mutation stacks. You can suck up enemies with larva. So it's good crowd control. You never feel like you're in trouble when you play Nidus. You always feel like you're in control of the situation. Can't die. Good crowd control, cool, aesthetics are cool, fun to play, just absolutely miserable to farm for. That's the only thing. Now, when it comes to the practicalities, offense, defense, support, you know, those categories, Octavia is the only Warframe on this entire list that gets a perfect mark in each of them. She is the strongest Warframe in the game. The problem is that she isn't all that fun to play. That is like the only thing holding her back from this game being Octavia frame. Because she plops down stuff on the ground, she plops down her mallet, it attracts enemy fire and bounces it back at them. That's her main damage dealer. The enemies shoot at the mallet instead of shooting at you. And this, you know, scales with enemy level, so it just scales forever. You can kill level cap enemies with this. You have a resonator, which is just a roller ball, and it shuts off enemy AI. The enemies just forget whatever they were doing. It can combine with the mallet, and then they just run around and shoot the mallet. You have your metronome. It's just an ability that you activate, and then you can just click buttons, right, to get buffs. It can be timed jumps, it can be timed crouches, and that's what people do. They spam crouch to become invisible, and then you stand there and be invisible and shoot your weapons. And then you just place the amp on the ground for like, a huge damage multiplier. So all of her abilities are just set it and forget it. All of them are duration based. You cast this, you cast this, you cast this, you cast this, and then you just keep track of your cooldown timers, and as soon as something runs out, you just recast it. And then occasionally you spam the crouch button to become invisible, and that's it. That's it. You just stand there in your huge music zone, be invisible, listen to your music, enemies around you die, they kill themselves. You can shoot them if you want to with your guns, but you don't need to because they kill themselves. And And that goes on forever, right? You're always invisible, so you can't die. You have infinitely scaling damage. You shut down enemy AI and you can just lock down entire zones where no one can do anything. Fantastic. Strongest Warframe in the game. It's just that whole playstyle can feel a bit boring, I guess, right? Because you don't have to engage with anything. You're just standing there and looking at cooldown timers. So that's what Octavia is. If you don't care about the fact that it's a bit tedious to play her, then here she is. Here is the absolute strongest Warframe in the game. That's the long and the short of it. So Harrow is super cool, right? He's super cool, but he does sort of have the same issues that Nidus used to have, in that he kinda has to be able to kill enemies himself, or he needs to be able to hit enemies to get all of his buffs and stuff to work. So if you're in a group and all of your teammates kill everything for you, then you can't really make him work. Which is weird, because he's a support Warframe. He gives buffs to the entire team and debuffs to enemies. So it's kind of weird to have a support Warframe that struggles to work in a team. That's where we're at with him. That is why I don't rank him as being beginner friendly at all. He requires a lot of finesse to understand him and to get him to work. But basically you sacrifice your shields to give yourself a bunch of buffs. But that's fine, because you can just cast Covenant, you know, to absorb all damage and make yourself immortal for a while. And you can use your Thurible to kill enemies, and when you kill enemies that are under the effects of the Thurible, you get energy, and your teammates get energy. It's just, it's buffs, it's multipliers, it's crowd control. It's very different. It feels very different, and your role in the team, it kind of feels different. And then it's like focused around headshots a lot as well. So if you can get some pistols or something that can, you know, benefit a lot from headshots, like his signature pistol, the Nell, then you can do some pretty wacky stuff with Harrow. It's just, he's cool, he's fun, he's different, he's pretty strong, but it's tricky to get his kit to work. And as a brand new player, you probably won't get his kit to work. So Gara is a Warframe that I'm giving a slightly lower rank to this year than last year. I have come to reassess some of the things about her. I think like the same issue I have with Gara is the one that I kind of have with Atlas, and as we're going to see later with Khora as well. Any sort of stat stick Warframe is that they require so much build around, and I think Gara requires more build around than practically any other Warframe. At first glance, when you look at her kit, you settle on this one, right? You focus on Mass Vitrify, the big glass wall, and you use her, if you're a new player, as a defense Warframe. You use it to protect the defense objectives, and to that end, oh, it's fantastic, it's great. She is one of the best defense frames that you can get your hands on if you are an early game player. Defense missions become a breeze if you just slam up a glass wall and enemies can't get through it. You can shoot out of it, they can't shoot into it. It's great. But then there's a second Gara. And the second Gara uses a combination of all of her abilities to create a loop that gives her infinitely scaling damage. First, you cast Splinter Storm. It gives you damage reduction, but it also creates a cloud of glass that swarms around you and deals damage to enemies. A little bit of damage. Then, you cast your glass wall. Then, you step outside of the glass wall, and you cast your number 1 ability on the glass wall. This is gonna make the glass wall shatter, and the glass is gonna hit you, and it's gonna hit your Splinter Storm, and it's gonna become a part of your cloud of shattered glass, and suddenly your cloud of shattered glass deals more damage than it did before. This also resets the duration of your Splinter Storm so that it doesn't run out, which you have to do because you can't recast the Splinter Storm until it has run out. Then you have your Spectral Rage, which is your tool for generating more energy so you don't run out of energy. And then that's the loop. You cast glass wall, you jump outside of glass wall, you shoot your number 1 at the glass wall, and that makes your number 2 stronger, and you make sure that your number 2 never runs out, because that resets everything and you have to start from the beginning again. Now if you do this and you keep this loop up, you can get damage numbers up into the millions. Hell, it can go up into the billions. It never stops scaling. So you can go up to level cap and deal damage, but this requires a lot of build around, it requires a lot of finesse, it requires keeping pace with like cooldown timers and making sure nothing runs out, making sure your energy doesn't run out. If it runs out then, and you have to start from the beginning again, then you're kind of screwed. It's also one of those stat stick things where the damage from your number 1 scales with how you've built your melee weapon, and that affects how much buffs you get to your number 2 when you cast your number 2 on your number 4. You hear what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, it's good. It's good, it's strong, it carries her way into the end game, but it's such effort. It is such effort to get those damage numbers when so many other Warframes can get those damage numbers so much easier than Gara can. So I'm actually going to bump down her numbers a bit, because at this point you kind of have to ask, like, is it worth it? Is it worth all of this work to get that damage when there are other Warframes that can get there so much easier than she can? Food for thought. Speaking of Warframes with stat sticks, the next one on the list is Khora. She works the same way in that her number 1 ability, the Whip Claw, the damage from this scales with how you have built your melee weapon. In this case, it even says so. Stats are boosted by the equipped melee weapons mods. That's how that works. So you need to read up on like how to build them, because Khora stat stick, Atlas stat stick, Gara stat stick, you build all of them a bit differently. Some scale with crit damage, others do not, etc. But that is her main damage dealer, and it's a good one. So if you can make a Whip Claw build, yeah, you can shred enemies that are in the levels of several hundreds with this thing. The damage numbers are crazy. But then what people mostly use Khora for is for her Strangle Dome. You slam it down, you create a dome of barbed wire. Hurts enemies a bit, but mostly it locks them down. Just traps enemies so you can defend objectives. And also, she has an augment called Pilfering Strangle Dome that makes enemies who die while they're in the Strangle Dome drop more loot. So, she, like Hydroid and Nekros, are one of the so-called loot frames, which is also why people gravitate toward her. Because you always need more loot, and if you have something that lets you get more loot, that's pretty good. It's pretty common nowadays to see a team of like 1 Nekros and 1 Khora working together to increase loot drops. But you have that, you have Ensnare, which is a pretty good crowd control ability to lock enemies in place. Works on a lot of different enemies that you need to hold in place. She has her Venari, which is usually, unfortunately, since it's cute, it's a cat, but that is usually the ability that you're gonna Helminth away and put something else in this slot, because it's just not as good as the rest. It's not essential to her kit. So, loot frame, good crowd control, excellent damage with her number 1 if you build around it. Take some finesse, not the most beginner-friendly Warframe. So if you are a new player and you're looking for a loot frame, I'm probably gonna recommend you pick Nekros instead. Khora is a bit more esoteric, Khora requires more build around, Khora is a bit trickier to understand. But ultimately, probably stronger when it comes to just pure offensive output. But man, just doing damage isn't everything, right? So Nekros is right there. But hey, Khora is also right there. If you like doing damage on your loot frame, go for Khora. Now, Revenant is one of the bad boys, one of the strongest Warframes in the game. He is great, he is insanely good, he is busted, and he's underrated. I rank him as one of the most underrated Warframes in the game, simply because most people have him in like their top 15 or something, and he is top 3. he should be top 3. He is one of the absolute strongest Warframes in the entire game, and the fact that he still isn't ranked as 1 is a crime. Now, his Prime just came out pretty recently upon filming this video, so I expect his play rate to go up as more people farm for his Prime, they start trying him out, and they realize just how good Revenant is. Why is he so good? His number 2 ability. So long as that's active, you're immortal. That's it. So long as it's active, you're immortal. You can't die. You can't be affected by anything. Your stat is immune. You're immortal. And if it runs out, you can just cast it again. His number 1 ability turns enemies into thralls. They now work for you. They kill each other. His number 3 ability, Reave, lets you dash through enemies, drain health and drain shields. If you dash through enemies that are enthralled, it deals like 10 times more damage. You can, if you have enough ability strength, I think the breakpoint is 250% ability strength, you can use Reave to one-shot enemies. So first you enthrall them, then you Reave through them, they die. This takes a percentage of their health instead of a set number, which means this works all the way up to the level cap, 9,999. They will still die to a one-shot with Reave. Also, if you Reave through enthralled enemies, that restores charges to your number 2 ability, which keeps you immortal for longer. So you have your number 2, your number 1, your number 2, and your number 3. They all work together. That keeps you immortal and lets you one-shot normal enemies all the way up to the level cap. That's pretty good. He also has a number 4 ability that lets him spin and do lasers, which is kind of useless for high-level content, but pretty great for clearing low-level content if you want to just do speed farming. In short, it's so coherent, everything clicks together, and it just creates this kit that makes him a powerhouse. Revenant is fantastic. It's the top 15 my ass. No, top 3. He's top 3. Garuda is in a really good spot right now. So as her Prime was released in 2022, she got a number of buffs and made her abilities even better. So she's actually very, very strong at the moment. They made her Dread Mirror redirect all damage, even like radial damage from the front. They made her immortal while she's casting her number 4, which was one of her main drawbacks, that she was vulnerable while she was casting it. They've just made little tweaks and buffs to Garuda over the past year that has put her in a very good spot right now. She has extremely good damage capabilities. She actually has pretty good survivability tools nowadays as well. She can create blood altars that can heal allies. She can regenerate her own energy, which is fantastic. And yeah, she's fun, she's fast, she's mobile, she's gory, she's great. If you want to farm for normal Garuda, you have to do Fortuna bounties, and you have to farm for toroids to craft her, which is kind of a nuisance. So she's another one of those frames where getting the Prime might actually be easier than getting the normal frame. But if you can do it, you just go and rip and tear until it's done. She's cool, she's got the vampire aesthetics, and the claws and the gore and all of that. And you just jump around and slash things, everything around you, and it's good. It works. Tons of damage, not a whole lot of holes in her game. Yeah, I love Garuda. Man, she's cool. She's so cool. So, not a lot of people played Baruuk before. His Prime just came out. People are going to play more Baruuk now, and they are going to realize what Baruuk is when they start playing with his Prime. And what Baruuk is better Excalibur. Baruuk is Excalibur, but he can do everything that Excalibur can do, and he can do it better. Excalibur has an augment for his exalted weapon that makes it, you know, adapt its damage type to one specific thing. Well, Baruuk has an exalted weapon that he can adapt so that it always hit enemies for what is specifically their weakness. So it's just better. Baruuk has Desolate Hands, which is one of the best damage reduction tools in the entire game. It also shoots out and protects allies as well. The only thing about Baruuk is that he has a meter called Restraint. He has to erode his restraint and become angry before he is allowed to use his exalted weapon. So you have to understand how to use his different abilities to erode restraint so that you can activate it. But as long as you understand that and you do that, you snap his Serene Storm active and you can punch through everything. It is so strong. This is the strongest and best exalted melee weapon in the game by far. And he's got Desolate Hands, so he's got one of the best damage reduction tools and one of the best defensive abilities in the game as well. The only thing about Baruuk is he's a melee frame. That's what he does. He uses his melee weapon, his exalted melee weapon. If you like melee frames, you're gonna love Baruuk. If you don't like melee frames, you're probably not gonna love Baruuk. So he's a bit divisive in that regard. Most melee frames are, aren't they? So either you like them or you don't. But he's definitely strong, definitely up there. If you played Excalibur and you want to level up and just find the next tier, then Baruuk is your guy. He can do anything Excalibur can do, but better. Hildryn is really cool design-wise. She's so aesthetically pleasing. The whole big buff bodybuilder muscle Valkyrie is just such fantastic design. Now, her thing is that she's mostly used for two things. Number one, she has a very good helmet ability called Pillage, which you give away to other Warframes in the helmet system, and it's just great for stripping enemy defenses and restoring your own shields. And number two, she is the best Warframe in the game for farming for Grendel, because she can do some stuff that doesn't require her to be modded, especially if you combine her with Elemental Ward in the helmet system, and then you can just skip through that in a breeze and get Grendel that way if you want Grendel. Other than that, what's interesting about Hildryn, what makes her different, is that she doesn't have energy. Instead, she has a ton of shields, and she uses her shields as a resource for casting abilities. It feels different, it feels a bit wonky. It makes her good for some sort of content, it makes her good for railjack missions as well. But it's cool. It's cool and a bit different. And then she just covers entire areas in crowd control stuff, and it hurts enemies and it drains enemy defenses. It's a bit mid when it comes to effectiveness. It's pretty good, but not spectacular. Most of the stuff that she can do is a bit outclassed by stuff that other Warframes can do. Not bad, by any means. She's not bad. She's just not like S tier. She's firmly one of those middle of the pack Warframes. If you just love the aesthetics of the muscle Valkyrie, then you're not gonna go wrong with her. Just understand that you are picking a Warframe that is firmly in the middle of the pack and not one of the consensus powerhouses. That's about it. So Wisp is one of those Warframes that I have had to slowly over time sort of come around on. And for a long time I actually rated her pretty low, and I thought that she was fairly overrated. I'm not gonna be one of those guys, right? I'm not gonna be one of those guys who just sticks to his guns, even when it's kind of clear that you know I'm wrong, like some people are with Inaros. But no, so you know what? Let's just yeah, I was wrong about Wisp. I'll say it. I'll admit it. No, but I'm gonna have to give her a higher rating than I have previous years, because, you know, I kind of have to acknowledge some stuff about her that I underrated before. I underrated how effective it is that she is actually invisible as long as she's airborne. Enemies just can't see her when she's airborne. That alone gives her so much survivability. Not to mention that she can use her number 2 ability to be invulnerable for a couple of seconds, so she has like a second rolling guard that she can do at will. She also has her reservoirs, which is the best support ability in the entire game, dropping these reservoirs on the ground, giving these massive buffs to everyone in the entire team who just steps close to them. I get it. It's great. Now, I still think that Breach Surge is better on other Warframes than it is on Wisp. This is her Helmet ability, and there are many other Warframes that can make better use of this ability than Wisp can. Like Ember, for example. This ability is better on Ember than it is on Wisp. And I still think her ult, her Soul Gate, is laughably bad. And unfortunately, like, that's the one you're gonna remove. It looks cool, it's just not very strong. But she is a fantastic support Warframe. She does have great survivability. She has so many assets, right? But I can see why people like her. I'm still not a Wisp main. I don't play Wisp a lot, but you know, I'll acknowledge it. I was wrong about Wisp. She's good. Okay, there, I said it. She's good. Gauss is just so great. He is one of the most well-designed Warframes in the entire game, where all of his 4 abilities just click and work together. There's like nothing you can helmet. There's nothing that you would want to remove from his kit. You need all of it to get the whole thing. He has a number 2 ability that, yeah, look at that. It can actually give him 100% damage reduction. It requires Redline to be active and be at like maximum charge, but so long as it is, you have 100% damage reduction. While as Redline is active, you get increased fire rate, increased attack speed, increased reload speed, so many cool things. And then you have your Thermal Sunder. You can tap to cast, you can hold to cast to do either heat or cold damage. You can do them one after the other to do blast damage. If you're at maximum Redline, you can freeze enemies solid with a tap. You can spam this for heat procs to strip armor. You run fast with your Redline to charge the battery. You crash into enemies with it. It's super fun and cool. He has such a great kit. Like, complete shutdown of all enemies, freeze them in place, strip them of all of their defenses, 100% damage reduction, fantastic buffs. He is just, you know, a powerhouse. Pretty hard to farm for. You have to do like kind of late level disruption missions on Sedna, and requires some build around, and it's kind of tricky for a new player to sort of like understand how everything synergizes together. But once you do it, and once you understand how Gauss works, and once everything clicks, he is a joy. So fun to just pilot this Warframe. People build him for like these meme builds of like, he run fast. Let's put in more mods to make him run even faster. It's like they don't No. Yeah, sure, he run fast, but that's not what Gauss do. What Gauss actually do is everything. He do everything. So that's why you pick him. Grendel is a Warframe that I have been singing the praises of for a long time. If you look at various resources and other tier lists, Grendel is consistently like ranked in the bottom. People have ranked Grendel as one of the worst Warframes in the game, and I am constantly asking people, what the hell are you smoking? Grendel has always been extremely underrated. He's always been really powerful. Most people who rank him low, they have never tried him. They don't know what he can do. Part of that is because he is hidden behind one of the hardest farms in the game, even though they've addressed that and they've made him easier to farm for now than he was before. Some people still think it's too hard, so they've heard that he's bad, so they don't bother to actually go and try him out. Go watch my video of how to farm for Grendel. Solo farming Grendel, use Elemental Ward Hildren, it's super easy, and then you can try him for yourself. Now, Grendel just got a rework, where they changed him up a whole lot and made him even better than he was before in most ways. So how does that reflect in the rankings? Well, for one, he's like, when it comes to raw offensive power, I'm actually going to lower his ranking because with the rework, they put a cap on its number 1 ability. You used to be able to eat as many enemies as you wanted and was stupid. It broke the game. It was one of the most ridiculous abilities that existed in Warframe. Now there's a cap. Now he can only eat 5 enemies at the same time, so he can't break the game anymore, which actually makes him somewhat less powerful when it comes to raw offensive power output. But on the other hand, they made all of his other abilities way better. His number 2 now hits enemies with viral damage instead of toxin damage like it was before. It gives 10 viral stacks to basically everything standing close to Grendel. It gives him all of his buffs at the same time, so you don't have to rotate between them. It is a fantastic support ability. His number 3, which used to be his number 4, hey, you can pilot it now. You can pilot it very easily. And now, when it knocks enemies around, it strips their armor, and it heals you. So, that's great, and if you have enemies in your gut, it doesn't even have an energy drain, so you can do it to your heart's content. And now you can cast your other abilities while this is active. So while you're rolling around, you can eat more enemies, you can cast your buffs, you can fire your regurgitate tank cannon at them. So you can just roll around, willy-nilly. That's fun. His regurgitate, when you hit enemies with it now, actually gives them, like, with just a little bit of power strength, a 100% armor strip. And it hits a big area. So you just spit one of the enemies that you have inside of you onto a group of enemies. They take a chunk of damage, they lose all of their armor, and then you can just, I don't know, roll over them or something and they're gonna die. He has a super cohesive kit now. Everything works together. Fantastic buffs for Nourish, both for Grendel and for the rest of the team as well. Armor stripping, just removing enemies from existence. Great for support. He is a super tank. He's got a teeny tiny amount of shields. Which lets him abuse shield gating really easy. On top of that, he also has good armor, good health. He's a massive tank. He can regenerate his own energy. Like, oh my god, he's so good. Like, all around, he is so good. The only thing holding him back is that he's pretty hard to farm for. He doesn't have a prime yet, so this is the only way to farm for him. And I guess some people maybe don't like the aesthetics of the big tubby guy, maybe because he just looks so different from all the other Warframes. But if you can get over that, and actually try Grendel out, you'd realize that he's actually one of the best Warframes in the game, not one of the worst ones. And I don't know what people have been smoking. Protea is one of those other Warframes that's like deceptively good, but she's ranked pretty high. I think people understand that she is actually really good. She's got her Blaze Artillery, which actually can produce ridiculous damage output, which is cool. She's got her Dispensary, which is a fantastic support ability, spits out health orbs, spits out ammo, spits out energy, and especially for like new players, just having a good energy economy is so important. You never get to cast as many abilities as you want to because you never have enough energy. Well, Protea, she just generates energy, and that's great. She's got her different grenades that she can throw out. There's damaging grenades. There's also grenades that protect you and gives you like shields and overshields. Fantastic. And then she has her kind of cool number 4 ability that lets her go back in time, which is a bit tricky, but it can be nice, because if you activate the ability and then you were to say die, then you don't die. You just get sucked back in time. So it can be a nice thing to trigger before you're about to do something risky, as it were, and then just that removes all the risk from it. Nice little set of abilities. Everything has its use. Everything is pretty strong. Every year I have to look at this animation. Whenever I have to talk about Zaku. I still, to this day, I've been laughing about this for 2 years now. I still, to this day, think that like his signature Sayandana, which is what I put on here, this must have been on purpose. I refuse to believe that it is by accident that they put him in this pose. The Donald Duck pose here, if you've seen that particular comic panel. This pose and this Sayandana, I refuse to believe that they did this by accident. This has to have been intentional. Anyway, Zaku is one of those nutty guys who has that combination of things that give him a 5 on the power scale. He has infinitely scaling damage by stealing your enemy's weapons and using them against them, and that scales with enemy level. And the ability to strip 100% of enemies' armor, or their defenses. So armor strip combined with infinitely scaling damage, that will give you a 5 on the power scale. Then, like, his way of surviving is by dodging, dodge chance, evasion, which isn't exactly reliable. Unlike damage reduction, you're still going to take the hit, but it's like 75% slower. I mean, 75% less damage. With a dodge chance, you're only going to take 1/4 of all hits, but it's going to hit you for full power. And eventually that stuff is going to one-shot you. So, you know, you need other stuff to survive with Zaku in high-level content. You need to use shield gating and the like. If you don't enjoy that playstyle, then, you know, that's unfortunate, but that's what he's got. And that's kind of the thing for me. I don't really enjoy the way he sort of plays himself, because you just cast number 2 and you suck enemies' weapons from them, and then they're just around you. They're shooting by themselves, so you don't really need to do anything. You just run around and keep from dying, and the enemies just die by standing close to you. It kind of plays itself a bit. I don't enjoy it all that much. I don't think it's super fun. And he's also trapped behind a pretty hard grind. The reason for that is to build him, you need a resource that you can only get from being at max rank with Solaris United in Fortuna. So not only do you need to farm Deimos for his stuff and level up with the Entrati family, you also need to reach the max rank in the open world on Venus to get some more parts needed to craft him. So that's a chore, that's a slog. But if you like the aesthetics of the Skelly Man, as it were, because he becomes a Skelly boy when he activates his number 4 ability. You can run around like a Skelly boy like this. If you like that aesthetic and you like the idea of stealing enemies' guns from them and using them against them, he's very strong. He's very strong, very good. He's just not for me. I think that's it. I don't particularly enjoy playing Zaku, but he's good. He's good. Now, I do enjoy playing Lavos. He is different from all other Warframes in that he does not have energy, he has cooldowns. In a way, you'd think that makes him beginner friendly because he has a functioning energy economy, right? Otherwise, with new players, they never have enough energy, they never get to use their abilities as much as they want to. With Lavos, you can. It's just that he's complicated. He is tricky to understand. He can infuse his different abilities with various elements by holding to cast, and you can combine them. If you hold like your number 1 that does Toxin and your number 2 that does Cold, if you hold 1 and 2 together, then suddenly you have imbued yourself with Viral. And now the next ability you cast is going to do viral damage in addition to the damage it's already doing. So you're always sort of like infusing yourself and imbuing yourself with different elements, and then you multicast and cast all of these abilities to hit enemies with status effects. And then you throw out your big number 4, and that does more damage to enemies depending on how many status effects that they are, under. So you can use this as a big room clearing nuke. And then it's got a big cooldown for 30 seconds. But then you can cast his number 3 ability, and that hits enemies. And the more enemies it hits, the more it reduces your cooldowns. And then you can cast your other stuff. So he's another one of those Warframes where if you're in a group and you don't get to hit any enemies with your transmutation probe, then you don't get to reduce your cooldowns, and then you can't cast your abilities very often, and then he doesn't really work. They've given an augment mod to his number 1 ability so that you can hit enemies with that and you can reduce your cooldowns in that way as well. I think that's a great change. It's one of the changes that I suggested when I reviewed Lavos when he first came out many years ago. So that's great that that has been implemented, which is, it's pretty much exactly what I had in mind. Beyond that, he's also a super tank. Great armor, great health. He is just tanky, tanky, tanky. So if you like the idea of the alchemist, if you think it's cool to infuse your various abilities with other elements and rotating between them and juggling cooldowns, if you think that sounds fun, and I do, I love complexity in Warframes. Warframes that, you know, require a bit of skill to use, I usually tend to think of those as very fun to play. If that sounds like fun to you, yeah, absolutely, I recommend Lavos. Lavos is really, really cool, really good, just tricky. So Sevagoth is unfortunately a Warframe that seems to have been left by the wayside a bit. Like, I never see anyone playing Sevagoth. I just never see him in missions. What's interesting about him is that he has, without a doubt, the best Helminth ability in the entire game. Gloom. It's an aura that slows enemies down and that gives you lifesteal on all of your attacks. That is fantastic. It's just that he gives Gloom away in the Helminth system, and it's so many Warframes want this ability. So most people, they farm for Sevagoth, and then they just chuck him in the Helminth to give Gloom to other Warframes. They don't actually play Sevagoth. The other thing holding him back is that he requires so much Forma investment. First, you have to build up Sevagoth. Then he has an Exalted Shadow, which is its own thing. You can use your abilities to fill up a meter. When the meter is full, you can summon your Shadow, and now you play as the Shadow. And you just run around and kill enemies with melee attacks as the Shadow. And they're really strong. The Shadow is really strong. But the Shadow has its own mod setup, which means you have to Forma the Shadow as well a bunch of times to make it strong. And here's the thing. The Shadow has an exalted weapon, the Shadow's Claws. They also need to be modded and formatted to become strong. So to get Sevagoth in its entirety up to the same strength as other Warframes, you need to put like 14 or so Forma into him. And that is a hefty investment for anyone, especially for like a new player. So I think what makes people not go for Sevagoth is just his massive, massive Forma investment that you need, and also the fact that you need to farm for him twice, because you definitely need to get Gloom at least once to put it in other Warframes. Other than that, like, he's pretty good. He has an exceptional passive. When he dies, he just becomes the Shadow, and then the Shadow gets a couple of seconds where you can just kill enemies with melee, and then you revive. So you just don't die. If you die as the Shadow, you just revert back into Sevagoth. So extremely good survivability. He just won't die. He won't die. And he can do really good damage as his Shadow as well. But tricky, clunky, and requires massive investment. He's good, but I can see that like he is definitely not gonna be for everyone. Alright, so hear me out. Yareli used to be the big punching bag, right? She came out, she was weak. She was. And she's got like the anime girl aesthetic and all of that. Like when she came out, they put her pretty early on in the game, and then she just put her as like a dojo form of a Warframe. So it's very clear that she was meant to attract like a new player base. It was meant to pull in the dudes who like anime girls, little magical girls, that aesthetic. Hey, gals as well. There's both dudes and gals out there who like the magical girl aesthetic. And that's what she's about. Not necessarily designed to be the end game busted whatever thing. But she was weak. And she got ranked very low. And she's been on bottoms of people's lists forever. But she's gone through quite a number of different buffs in 2022 over and over again. They recently buffed her even further. And we're actually now at a point where Yareli isn't bad. She isn't bad at all. Her number 4 no longer like yeets enemies away immediately after casting it. No, now you can hold enemies in there for quite some time so that you can kill them. and it's no longer like annoying to use. Merulina now works like Iron Skin. When you cast it, it has a period of time for a couple of seconds where it just absorbs enemy damage and gives it more health instead. Just like Iron Skin, just like Nezha's Warding Halo. So the whole thing about it immediately dying in high level content, no, that's not a thing anymore. No, that works better. Her passive that gives her better crit chance when she's when she has been moving, that one, it doesn't like just immediately disappear when you're staying still again, so it's easier to make that one work. Her sea snares now gives like a damage debuff to enemies, so the enemies take more damage while they're trapped inside the sea snares. Like all in all, these abilities, they still work the way they did before, they've just made them better. They made them better to the point where now her kit is actually quite strong. They didn't change the functionality, they just made bigger number. So now Yareli has the big numbers, and if you still rank her like in the bottom, then I have to inform you, she's no longer in the bottom. Caliban is really cool. Caliban is a misunderstood Warframe. I don't think people understand what he's supposed to be, but he's a support Warframe. That's what he is. He doesn't excel in damage dealing abilities, but he excels in support. He has one bad ability, his number 1 ability, and that ability you can just helmet away, because it's kind of bad. Put something better in there. But like his number 2, it lifts enemies up in the air, it makes them take more damage, it makes them more vulnerable to damage. That ability is good. His number 3, it summons sentience to your side that draw enemy fire, hit enemies for damage, and repairs his shields. That ability is good. His number 4 ability creates a zone on the map, enemies inside it get all of their defenses permanently stripped, and they also take a bit of damage. That ability is good. Now, people have been building him all wrong, and I've put out several videos like how you're supposed to build Caliban. I hear these like completely wrong things about him, where people are saying like, oh, he doesn't have a dump stat, you have to build for everything, and that's impossible. No, he has a dump stat. Duration is his dump stat. You're supposed to build him for negative duration because you want to be able to spam this as soon as you can for brief respite builds. You don't want these to last very long because you want to be able to keep spamming them. And you're supposed to treat him like an ability spammer. You want to build him for maximum efficiency, and you want to be casting like 20 abilities per second. Just cast, which is super fun. It's super fun to play him this way, where you're just spamming abilities left and right, creating entire zones on the map of visual effects, and just explosions that debuff enemies and strip their defenses and regenerate shields. And it's cool. It's cool, it's fun, he's good. So, if you haven't heard it yet, you heard it here first. Hey, go check out my playlist. I put out like build guides for just how to build Caliban. Find my video for Breach Surge Caliban. Watch it, see if maybe you'll change your mind about him and realize that, oh man, I got him all wrong this entire time. He's actually really cool. And finally, we are at the Warframes that were released in 2022 and who were not part of last year's list. Number 1, Gyre. Gyre was probably, I'm gonna say, the most disappointing Warframe that was released in 2022. You farm for her in the Zariman, so this is post New War content. It's a very, very late game farm. So is it worth it to try to get her? Well, no, not really. When she came out, she was bugged, and her rotor swell did some stupid damage numbers, and it did some stuff that it wasn't supposed to do. That got fixed pretty quickly. Unfortunately, after that fix, she doesn't really have any good damage dealing abilities. Her arc spears, they're cool. You drop these nodes on the ground that like do electrical damage, but they're like not that good. Her coil horizon, you throw a ball that sucks in enemies as a grouping ability. It's good, but it's not that good. Her cathode grace, that one is fantastic, because that one gives you more crit chance and energy regen, and you can increase the duration of it by killing enemies. We're gonna get back to this one. And then you have a rotor swell. It just creates an electric field around you. It hits enemies around you. And it used to be like a stupid damage dealing thing, but now it's not anymore. What's interesting about rotor swell is that this kind of makes her a loot frame, because rotor swell destroys resource containers, which is very rare to have Warframe abilities that do that. So if you build her for max range and activate rotor swell and just run through a map, you're gonna break all of the containers, and that's pretty good for looting. It actually is. It actually is good for looting. Now, here's the thing. What makes Gyre really beginner friendly, which is kind of crazy considering how late in the game you have to farm for her, is because of the energy regen. And this is gonna be a recurring theme for all of the new Warframes dropped in 2022, is that they all have some method of being able to regenerate their own energy, which is fantastic. I have long been a proponent of the idea that I think all Warframes in the game should have passive energy regen. I think that should just be a thing. I don't, like, sure, keep energy orbs as well, but I think for a new player starting to play this game, the idea that you just can't use abilities very often, I think, is off-putting. And maybe they've realized that as well, because nowadays when they release new Warframes, they all seem to have a way of being able to regenerate their own energy. And that's great. That's great. The only problem here is that Gyre, you have to be several hundred hours into the game before you can start farming for her. So by that point, it's a bit moot. But I guess if you buy her for platinum, that's one thing she's got going for her. But other than that, she is not particularly strong as a damage dealer, and if you've noticed when I've hovered over abilities, she doesn't really have any good defensive tools either. The idea is simply that she's supposed to survive by crowd controlling, but all of her crowd control is just dealing electricity procs to enemies around her to, like, momentarily stun them. It doesn't really work all that well. So she struggles with survivability, and she's not a great damage dealer. She's very hard to farm for, but she's got energy regen, which is great. So she's got that going for her. But other than that, I think this one was a bit of a miss. Styanax, however, number 50, Warframe number 50, right? That's an event. And this guy's actually really good. He's also a very, very late game farm. That's why I opened this video by saying if there's any Warframe that you should maybe buy for platinum if you're a new player, it's this guy, because my god, he is such a treat for a new player to have in their arsenal. His number 1 ability, you can chuck it at enemies, and then they stick to a wall, and then they suck in other enemies as well in like a vortex. That's pretty cool. His number 2, look at this, you clonk enemies, and that just strips their defenses. Right? Their shields, their armor, clonk. Now it's all gone. With just a single swipe of a cast. Bam! Which is great. It also regenerates your health when you plonk enemies like with this. So you get to heal. You strip enemy defenses and you get to heal. That's great. His number 3 ability, Rally Point. Yeah, it draws aggro when you cast it, but who cares? Because you're a cool guy. But when you cast it, you start regenerating energy. It also helps your teammates. It gives your teammates energy regen as well if they're standing close to you when you cast it. And look at that. When you get kills and kill assists when this is active, you regenerate your shields. So we have methods for regenerating your health. You have methods for regenerating your shields. You have pretty nice armor as it is. So he's just all around, you know, pretty tanky. Pretty tanky. He doesn't excel at anything, but he's got a little bit of everything, which is exactly what you want when you're a new player and like going through the base game. And you got energy regen. You can regenerate your own energy, which means that you can be casting abilities all the time. Now, for this to work, you kind of want to increase your ability efficiency and your big energy pool so that you get more energy than you lose when you cast this. It works with your power strength, ability strength as well, but that's fine. You can build around it. It's not that hard to get like a net gain of energy with this, with just a couple of mods. And then finally you have your big final stand, which is a cool alt. You jump into the air, you chuck spears at all of your enemies. It feels good to use. It's strong. And it's just appropriate as an alt. So he's got this really nice package of a kit where you can clonk enemies to strip their defenses and heal yourself. You can pin enemies to the ground and pull them together. You can regenerate your shields, you can regenerate your energy, and you got a big, stupid, flashy alt that actually does a lot of damage. He's fun. He's built to be fun for a new player to this game. Like, this guy should be a starter. This guy should be a starter, and everyone would love playing Warframe if this was like their first impression of the game, playing Styanax. No, this guy's a smash hit. I think this was a success. It's just a bit sad that they made the most beginner-friendly Warframe in the game and put him in like post-New War grinds that's gonna take several weeks to where new players are never gonna see him unless they buy him for platinum. So, bit of a shame, but damn, he's cool. Man, he's so cool. I love Styanax. And finally, we have Voruna. Now, she came out very recently from me making this video, so I haven't played with her that much yet, but I have tried her out a fair bit, just to see what she's like, and, like, she's a weird one. She's a weird one, and when I look at her design and everything about her, this just feels like something that didn't really come together the way they had imagined it. She's supposed to be a wolf-themed Warframe, except everyone commenting thinks that she doesn't really look like a wolf. She looks more like a dragon than anything else, and she's got these wolf heads flying around her, and that's supposed to be the wolf theme, and they give her different buffs. But these buffs don't really feel all that wolf-inspired either, because, you know, she can hold cast to get different passives. One increases her parkour velocity. I guess that's wolfy. I guess run fast. But then you have one that gives her status immunity. What's wolfy about status immunity? And then you get one that gives her more heavy attack efficiency. What's wolfy about that? And then her final ability, if you hold to cast, just gives her a cheat death, where she just like doesn't die. What's wolfy about that? It doesn't feel very wolfy, does it? But then you look at her like ability kit and what she can do. And okay, so it's invisibility and melee damage and slashing and bleed procs. Yeah, okay, that feels a bit wolfy. And then you have this one, which just inflicts 10 stacks of 5 random status effects on an enemy. It's good. It's not very wolfy. And then you have this one. You activate it, and while it's active, enemies killed by melee attacks drop health orbs. Enemies killed by headshots drop energy orbs. That's not very wolfy. And then you have Alfred's Descent. This one is a bit wolfy. You go down on all fours, and then you jump between enemies, and then you slash them for slash damage, and it does progressively more damage if you kill enemies with it. Okay, that one's a bit wolfy. So, you have 2 abilities that feel wolfy, and 2 abilities that don't. And then you have her different passives, where some feel wolfy and some don't. And then you have her aesthetics, which feels a bit wolfy, but then also not. The design for Voruna is just all over the place. It's just all over the place, and it's kind of hard to make sense of like what they were going for here and what their idea is for what this Warframe is supposed to be and how this Warframe is supposed to play. But what we end up with in the end is a Warframe that's kinda based around invisibility a little bit and melee damage a little bit, and then an alt that doesn't really synergize with her melee buffs, but it does slash damage. And then sort of inconsistent status spreader that can work as a room nuke sometimes. It's I don't know. She's very hard to review because I don't really see what they were going for with her. Damage output, pretty good if you like melee frames. Survivability, pretty good if you like invisibility. Support, not really. She just does a lot of damage and she jumps between enemies. Farming her is a bit easier than the other new ones. It's on Lua, You just have to play the War Within, and then you can play the new survival missions on Lua, and you can farm for her there. And it's pretty forgiving that you get a resource that you can then spend at the Zariman to buy whatever parts you didn't find when you farmed her. Compared to a lot of other Warframes they've released recently, she's earlier on in your journey through Warframe that you can get her. That's nice, I guess. Is she beginner friendly? No, not really. She's complicated. Is she fun to play? I don't know. I don't know if Varuna is fun to play. I can't decide, really. She's a weird one. She's really weird. That's my review of Varuna, okay? She's weird. I might have a more informed opinion a year from now. And that's it, people. That is the roster review for 2023. We got through it. We got through it together, you and me. And as always, let me know what I am super wrong about. What made you do a spit take when you heard me say it and you were like, I can't believe how goddamn wrong he is about this. Let me know it. Let me hear it. Or if you just think that this was a good resource and you appreciated it and you watched the entire thing and now you just want to comment and say, hey man, I think this was a good video and I think you're a cool guy, then let me know that as well. I appreciate it. It's nice to hear the support. But thanks for watching, everyone. It's been a long one. And I will see you again tomorrow for something completely different.